KNON 89.3 FM in Dallas and Fort Worth, the voice of the people.
Business owners, tell KNON's listeners about your business. You can put your business or event on KNON. KNON currently has space available to run announcements for you. Tell KNON's listeners about your goods, services, nightclub, concert, or event. Help keep the voice of the people on the air while putting your information on the air. KNON's been named the #1 radio station in Dallas by both the Dallas Observer and D Magazine. Put your business with Dallas's #1 station. Call now for more information at 214-828-9500, extension 227, or extension 233. For more information, go to KNON.org and click on the Run Spots on KNON page. It's a great way for your business to support community radio while letting more people know about you.
What a game! What a game!
Get off my lawn.
Jim Schutze here with Get Off My Lawn, as Gene likes to call it, the darkest hour in radio. Good to be back. Wow, what a week. You know, my wife and I are both lifelong journalists, newspaper people, and every once in a while we feel a need to get away from the news. So we took a week off and spent it in the hill country. Had a great time, but we spent an awful lot of the time glued to the TV, the radio, and the iPads because of the events of the week. And at the end of that experience, I find myself sort of overwhelmed, obviously by the events themselves, but also by the experience of being out there for a week as a media consumer rather than a media producer. And it's a pretty, I don't know, it's a pretty overwhelming experience to sort of be able to sit back and watch how the news media handles stories like Boston and West. Some of it's wonderful. It's amazing, and the instantaneity, I guess we would call it, and the incredible ability not of the formal media, but the kind of crowdsourcing ability of the public, of all of us, to rush in through social media and other means, and not only comment on and talk about the story, but apparently in Boston, social media played a role in sleuthing out the bad guys, which is pretty astonishing. I want to talk about all that this morning, and I want to hear how you feel about this experience of watching all this go down. Call me up. I'm at 972-647-1893. 972-647-1893. Jim Schutze with Get Off My Lawn. Here's the one headline from the week in terms of commentary on media that really grabbed me. Now, I have to substitute a word here that we can't say on the radio. This is a word that starts with the letter F, and I'm going to use the word blank instead of this word. But I think you'll get what it is. It starts with F, and there are 4 letters in the present tense of this verb. But I'm going to say blank, okay? This is a headline from Gawker. Is the New York Post edited by a bigoted drunk who blanks pigs? Question mark. I'm not sure in all of the media commentary that I've read over the years that I've ever seen that particular question raised about the editor of a major American daily newspaper, and they're asking if he's a bigot, specifically a racist, if he's an alcoholic, and does he blank pigs? That's quite an array of questions to ask about a major figure in American journalism. And let me explain how this intriguing headline came about. They're actually commenting, Gawker is commenting on the incredible string of horrible reporting that the New York Post did this week on the Boston Marathon story, just sort of running from one terribly wrong, sloppy story to another, starting with way over-reporting the number of deaths. And kind of just figuring they'd grab the biggest number they could. I don't have here in the notes in front of me what their first claim was, but it was huge. And then later they sort of just started reporting the much smaller numbers that came from authorities without ever saying anything to the readers. Sorry about the hugely inflated number that we pulled out of our hip pockets, we'll say on the radio, and reported. But the immediate occasion for this headline, the headline again is the New York Post edited by a bigoted drunk who blanks pigs, was a front page story they ran with a picture of a couple guys that they said were the bad guys. And in fact, they were described in a huge headline as bagmen, a reference to their backpacks that obviously had the bombs in them. And pictures of these guys on the front page of, a major metropolitan daily newspaper. Bagmen. Feds seek these two, pictured at Boston Marathon, the giant subhead said. Now, as it turned out, the two people they had on the cover had nothing to do with anything. One of them was a 17-year-old high school runner. I don't know who the other guy was, but they were the wrong two. They weren't the right guys. And they were recognizable as all get out. Their friends recognized them, families recognized them, fellow students, neighbors, everybody. Oh my God, there are those two guys we know. They're the bombers in New York. Well, they weren't the bombers, and that's bad enough that they published these pictures of the wrong people on page one with this slam bang headline, Bagman. But then when they found out that they were the wrong guys, they just kind of shrugged it off. Like, well, that's what our sources said, and hey, everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect. So this story in Gawker by Tom Skoka kind of turns it around. The point of this is, okay, New York Post, how would you like it if we applied your standards to you? And the story runs down at some length through all of these questions. Is the New York Post edited by a bigoted drunk who blanks pigs? And they say, now we have no hard evidence that the editor is an alcoholic, and so we're not going to say right out that he's an alcoholic. We're just raising the question, but it's possible that he's not an alcoholic. And then they go on to the business about pigs, and they point out that he is from Australia, where there's a very major agricultural element in the economy. And yet they say they don't know for sure that means that he engages in bestiality. They stick with the bigoted part of the headline. They say the evidence of that is that they take these pictures of these two sort of dark complected people, and they feel okay saying these are probably the guys. These are probably the villains. They didn't put a couple of blonde-haired, blue-eyed Swedes on the cover. These were Arab-looking guys, supposedly, and who knows what ethnicity they really were. But you could look at them and decide that they were kind of Arab-looking, and so that made it okay for somebody at the New York Post to suggest that these were the bad guys, and. So what this story in Gawker is just an angry complaint about the incredible callousness of the New York Post there are ways to avoid making this kind of mistake. There always have been in journalism. If you've got one source who says, hey, I think these could be the guys, then you call around to some more people. It's simple. You call around, you call some other cops, you call some other authorities, and I've been doing this all my life. If it's the wrong guys, and you make a couple more calls, people are going to say, no, that guy's crazy. Those aren't the suspects. Don't go with that. And you're going to find out that the story won't hold. It won't make, as we say in the business. And it's usually pretty simple to get that done. What it reveals is that there's all kinds of wrong information that just explodes across the landscape when something like this happens. And everybody in the business knows that. You know that you're going to get all kinds of rumor and stuff that won't hold up. That's why you're supposed to check it out. What's especially sleazy in this case is that there's something about this wrong information that the New York Post liked. It fit a certain paradigm. It fulfilled a certain stereotype. They figured their readers would like it. They say, oh, yeah, we knew it was some guys who looked like that. And so it works for them. And they can pretend to be out in front of everybody else on the story because they're just grabbing the junk information and throwing it down on the page. But they know better. These guys are they're in the business. They've been doing this all their lives. They know that this information that they're purveying is junk, and yet it works for them. And so that's one form of incredible, one source of misinformation in this kind of event, which is coming from people who are putting it out there deliberately, in full knowledge that the information isn't worth the paper it's printed on, and yet they're doing it to get attention. They're doing it cynically and knowingly. And so that's where we get this headline in Gawker, turning it around on the New York Post, kind of as if to say, okay, fine, how would you like it if the media reported on you, New York Post, this way? And that's how they came up with the headline, is the New York Post edited by a bigoted drunk who blanks pigs. I don't want to let this get away from me without naming this gentleman. His name is Col Allen. C-O-L was his first name. Allen, A-L-L-A-N. Comes to us from the Australian School of Journalism. Surprise, surprise. Oh, I think I just engaged in a slur there. Sorry. But anyway, that's one side of what was going on this week, was deliberate, manipulative misinformation to get attention, sell papers, get clicks, the whole very sadly predictable syndrome. Call me up, by the way, and I'd like to hear how the media coverage affected you during the week. I'm sure a lot of you were just as glued to it as I was. I'm at 972-647-1893, 972-647-1893. I have to say that there was something about, we wound up watching, and I started at the top of the show explaining my wife and I were on vacation in the hill country, and we would have been a little cut off from media because we rented this little cottage, and the TV there only got like 3 stations. There wasn't full cable. However, we've both become, addicted to our iPads. And so we both had iPads there, and it turns out we can watch CNN live on our iPads and everything else. And so rather than getting out and going out to see the Bluebonnets as we had planned, we spent a good deal of time sitting in this dark little room staring at our iPads watching CNN. And I have to say, CNN didn't bother me in the same way the New York Post stuff did. but it bothered me. It's so incredibly sloppy, and it's so, it just keeps trading around all of this misinformation to an old-fashioned. My wife and I are both old-line newspaper people, and so we're used to doing this stuff the old way, and we know that the initial reporting process is sloppy. There's a great fog of war out there, and all kinds of crazy stuff comes into the newsroom. But in the old days, there was this, and there still is with daily newspapers, there was this mechanism in place that filtered all of it so that the public never saw that aspect of the reporting. Before any of that got printed on the page, it went through a rewrite man, it went through an assistant city editor, a managing editor, an executive editor. It went to the copy desk and went through people. There were so many levels, and still are, hopefully, excuse me, of review, that things got sorted out and nailed down before they got printed on the page. So instead, what you have when you watch CNN is you're watching the raw process going on. And to me, as a media professional all my life, that's embarrassing. To me, that's like all of us running around in our underwear on TV. And it doesn't seem like it should be done that way. However, I find a very different take on it from for example, my son is in his late 20s, and his assumption is that everything you see on TV and everything you read on the internet is just disinformation and junk. But that if you fly around broadly enough and scoop up enough of it, and compare it, weigh it all against itself, that you'll develop this kind of gut sense for the little breadcrumbs of truth through it. Now, maybe why that bothers me is that it makes us in the media look like idiots. But I guess we become sort of useful idiots. I have to admit, it puts the editing process and the weighing process in the hands of the reader, where it probably always was ultimately, and takes it away from us. It allows, however, for an awful lot of collateral damage on the way in terms of the wrong information that gets out there. I'm headed up to a break in a minute, and I want to hear from you about your experience of following these stories, the Boston Marathon bombing and the explosion in West. Call me up at 972-647-1893. It's 972-647-1893. And I'll be back in a minute, and want to hear how these stories affected you too. Jim Schutze with Get Off My Lawn. See you in a minute.
Jim Hightower has moved to be a part of KNON's Speak Up Saturday. Jim Hightower's segments can now be heard at the start of each of KNON's great talk programming, starting at 7 a.m. with Reverend Marion Barnett's show, Church Information and Open Forum, with the news and talk of South Dallas. Then at 9, the CWA presents Workers Beat with the news and talk of the unions, hosted by Gene Lance and Bonnie Matthias. At 10, the Dallas Observer presents Get Off My Lawn with Jim Schutze, bringing you the other side of Dallas news. Finishing up Speak Up Saturdays at 11 is Lambda Weekly with the news and talk of the LGBTQ community, hosted by David Taffet, Patty Fink, and Laurent Landis. Now starting at each of these shows is Jim Hightower's insightful segment at 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 a.m. each and every Saturday morning right here on the Voice of the People, KNON 89.3 FM.
We now have fewer than 500 copies left. That's right, fewer than 500 copies left of the KNON Texas Blues Radio Volume 5 Blues CD. Texas Blues Radio features great blues from Tutu Jones, Blues Boy Bo, Buddy Whittington, Andrea Dawson, Kirkland James, Sonny Colley, Johnny Red and the Roosters, the Chris Watson Band, the Two Tones, Rough Cut Blues Band, Jeff Stone and Charlie Love, Dave Millsap, Sirloin and the Ass Kicking Machine, Michael J. and the Paul Bird Band, and JJ and the Detonators. Get your copy now at Forever Young Records in Grand Prairie, Record Town in Fort Worth, and in Dallas at Bill's Records. Destined to be a Dallas Blues collectible, a very limited amount of vinyl copies can be found at Forever Young Records, the sponsor of this great blues project. CD downloads are now only $11 at cdbaby.com. Whether you get it as a download, on vinyl, or on CD, all the proceeds benefit KNON. More information at knon.org.
This is William, your videographer for the KNON talk shows. You can watch church information and forum by going to the knon.org website. Click on schedules to the left side of your screen. Choose Church Information and Forums page. Scroll to the bottom of that page, then choose your favorite show to watch or download. This show will be ready for viewing by lunchtime Tuesday. Have a great day.
Jim Schutze back with Get Off My Lawn, talking about the events of the week, the fertilizer plant explosion in West, and the bombings at the Boston Marathon, and the fact that I was out of town with my wife and we wound up glued to our iPads following in this. And I'm talking about this as a media experience, as a lifelong reporter myself. What it was like to watch this process. Clearly what happens when I'm looking at CNN and the reporters in the street, and I see a reporter who, I don't want to be unkind about this, but looks and sounds to me kind of like a model. And she's saying breathlessly, the police all have their hands on the barrels of their guns. And I'm thinking, what are they doing with their hands on the barrels of their guns? And then she says, oh, well, those are not the barrels, those are the bottoms of the bases of their guns. And there's something about it that's like, it makes me realize, okay, they've taken all of the talking heads out of the studio and they've dumped them out on the street. And for a lot of these people, this is the first time that they've ever seen police action in a crime scene on the street. I know I sound like the crabby old guy about this, but there's just such a huge amount of green about it, of inexperience, and people who just don't know what they're talking about. There was one scene in Watertown when the police rushed into a site where they obviously thought that they had the guy cornered, and it turned out that he wasn't there. But before they knew that, the police were rushing in, and they were this isn't funny, but the cops were climbing up on rooftops and training their guns on this spot where they thought the guy was. And the reporter, who in this case did know what she was talking about, started saying, we need to use the delay. You need to cut away. You need to get away from this scene. And the obvious reason for that is the bad guy's watching it too. He's on his phone or whatever, and he's watching the coverage. So if you do the coverage live, he gets to see where all the cops are. And then he knows how to shoot them. And so you don't want to do that. You don't want to betray unless you want to help get the cops shot, you don't want to betray their positions. So this long argument starts, or not an argument, kind of a debate. Well, somebody, Cuomo or somebody says, well, I guess we should cut away because we don't want to show anything untoward. There's a word you don't hear every day in a newscast, untoward. We might show something that would be disturbing to the youth. Well, that's not the issue. Believe me, if you have footage of the guy getting shot, that's going to be an endless loop, eventually, on TV and on the air. That's not the problem. The problem is you want to cut away so you don't betray the positions of the police officers and get them killed. But nobody at CNN got that for the longest time, and the scene stays up and the camera stays up, and they're still showing all of this, and finally they figure it out and cut away. And so I'm just left with this impression that bothers me as an old newspaper guy of incredible sloppiness and lack of professionalism. However, I guess, who cares about... I mean, maybe I'm just worrying about how we in the media look. What people care about is the story, and the other piece of this is that the viewer and the reader is enormously able to sort that out. People can figure it out. People can, and maybe it's better to see the media in all of our fallibility, and realize maybe I guess the lesson is that the reader or the viewer figures, well, I gotta sort this out myself, because half the time these guys don't know what they're talking about. And that's always been true. It's always been true in the reporting process. Half the time, half the reporters don't know what they're talking about. As I said before in the first segment, there just used to be a lot more editing and filtration of that, so that by the time it got to the audience, we did know what we were talking about. And maybe all that's happened is that now it's up to the audience to sort that out for themselves. I want to switch up and talk a little bit about West and what happened there and that coverage. But first, let me read something that's a statement from the station, from KNON, that has to do with the events in West. Here's the statement. KNON is deeply saddened by the events that took place in the town of West Texas this week. Many items are needed for the town, including bottled water, toiletries, baby items, blankets, and pet food. Items such as this can be taken to the KJT Society, located at 1216 South Paris Street in Ennis. Let me repeat that address. It's the KJT Society. It's in Ennis on Paris Street at 1216 South Paris Street. KJT Society, 1216 South Paris Street in Ennis. That's where you can take items for West. The other thing they really need in West, I've heard this repeated several times, and the statement from the station says it, monetary donations are being collected by the SPJST organization. For information or to make a donation, go to their website at spjst.org. What they really need down there, the biggest help right now in something like this, is cash, is money, to help them give people the assistance that they need. That website is S as in Sam, P as in Paul, J as in James, S as in Sam, T as in Tom.org, spjst.org. Go there and you can make donations, and you can help with the terrible needs in West. The West tragedy was terribly moving for me and my wife as we watched it. We, like a lot of you, know West, know the town some, and know people from West, and know the very, very interesting history of West and how it was settled. It's every community like this that has something terrible happen always gets the same sort of line applied to it in the stories. Everybody says, well, it's a very tight-knit community. And maybe all towns or small towns are tight-knit in that way. But in West, it's especially true because of the way the town was settled. its Czech and Polish history, and the fact that the people settled there initially were subject to discrimination and all kinds of shunning by some people in the surrounding area. My old friend, one of the best rewrite men in the history of the newspaper business, is no longer with us. Ernie McCovey grew up in West, and he told me how the West football team and all the accompanied by everybody else in West who could fight, who wasn't on the football team, would show up on the bus in these towns, other towns in the surrounding area, and then the guys from the surrounding school would come out and start yelling Bohunk, B-O-H-U-N-K, which is an ethnic slur that they used against the guys from West. And everybody on the West bus would pile out, and Ernie said, you had to fight. Before you could play football, you had to fight. And of course, people have come over the years through the West Fest, the wonderful annual festival in West, to know and love the town. And so it has this especially closely woven, tight-knit fabric. And it was, I mean, how could it not be horrible to witness this kind of tragedy anywhere? But the tragedy had a special flavor because of where it happened. There is, and I want to go back to media coverage, however. In both the West story and the Boston marathon bombing story, there's this narrative that gets going in the coverage immediately about how the people are standing up, how the people won't be defeated, how the people, this is bringing out the best in all of us. On the one hand, I think certainly in West it's true because that's how the town is. There was all this stuff in Boston about how when they picked on Boston, they picked on the wrong city. Boston showed its resilience. I want to say this very carefully. I think the people in Boston, I think we as a nation showed a lot more resilience to this bombing in Boston than we did to 9/11. I think we're learning how to stand up to this stuff. On the other hand, all the people in Boston were in their basements for most of this experience, where they were told to go. And we saw when it was over and they had the parties on the streets how relieved they were to get out of their basements. I just find something in this media line, in these stories about how this is bringing out the best in everybody, something enormously patronizing, some kind of attaboy that I don't think people need. And also, it's not true. How is getting bombed and hiding in your basement, how is getting half your town blown away bringing out the best in you, at least right away? That's actually not true of these tragedies. And you could say, well, what harm does it do to say this kind of stuff? Isn't it comforting to people? Yeah, okay. I would leave it to people to comfort themselves and so on. I'm just not sure it has to come right away from the news media. And in some cases, and West is a good example, it may get in the way of other questions that need to be raised. In West, there are huge questions about what really happened, and they're questions that are very important to all of us in Texas. The morning news has got some great coverage focused on these questions in today's paper. Bill Minutaglio, who's a former morning news guy and a Dallas author and journalist, has a very interesting piece on the op-ed page of the New York Times today about it. Minutaglio's piece goes straight to the question of this culture of sort of low, relaxed, or deregulation in Texas, The fact that Greg Abbott and Rick Perry, Governor Oops, who of course rushed to the scene to express their sympathy and condolences, as they should. There's nothing wrong with that. They should have. But look, these guys are architects of the philosophy that you could argue produced the devastation in West, which is very, very slack regulation for these kinds of facilities. Slack regulation for everything, but in particular for stuff that blows up and catches on fire. Minutaglio knows about these things because he wrote a book about the enormous Texas City explosion, April 16, 1947, which, by the way, involved the same stuff, the same chemicals that may have played a role in what happened in West. It's ammonium nitrate. And ammonium nitrate's an enormously dangerous explosive substance. In West, 100 times, they had a storage facility full of ammonium nitrate that contained 100 times the amount of ammonium nitrate that was used to blow up the Murrah building in Oklahoma. And yet nobody knew it was there. There's another problem. We don't know what blew up in West, because there were two kinds of things there that were potentially explosive. Ammonium nitrate, which is like dynamite, and then anhydrous ammonium, which is a fluid. I'm sorry, I may get in trouble here chemically, but anhydrous ammonia is an element in the liquid fertilizer that they ship out of the plant. The early reports said that it was the anhydrous ammonia that went off, that exploded. If you searched around enough on the internet while this was going on, you would find a few people out there who were talking to explosives experts about that. And one of them, that I listened to at 4 a.m, said that it was extremely unlikely that it was the anhydrous ammonia that went off, because it's hard to get that stuff to go off. It would take a real a bizarre confluence of factors to make that happen. Let me pause. We've got Steve on line 4. Steve, how are you today?
Yes, sir. How are you this morning, sir?
What's up?
Yeah, I agree, too, on some of the sloppiness of the media coverage of the Boston bombing. I was watching the Piers Morgan show late night, and there was the gentleman took a picture, and they gave the guy's name as Dave Green. Don't know if that's an alias name, who actually had the second suspect in photo in the lower left-hand corner of his picture.
Uh-huh.
And Piers Morgan's interviewing him and asking him, well, what city do you what state do you live in? What city do you live in? And the gentleman's answering the questions, and even Piers starts asking, what occupation are you in?
Uh-huh.
At that time, we don't, and still at this time, we don't know if this is part of a bigger plot, but a guy that gives a picture to the FBI, if this is bigger part of a plot,
yeah,
the terrorists know exactly this guy's name. If his name truly is Dave Green, he lives in Tallahassee, Florida, and worked for whatever XYZ company, and the name of the company was. I thought that's pretty sloppy to ask this gentleman who brought forth incriminating evidence and could potentially put this gentleman in harm.
Yeah.
We just don't know at this time if this is part of a bigger plot, if these two young punks were part of something larger.
Right. Well, that's a good point, Steve. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Have a great day.
Very much for calling in. And anybody else who has thoughts about how this coverage went, give me a call at 972-647-1893, 972-647-1893. We've been talking now, we started out talking about the Boston Marathon. We've been talking a little more now about the explosion in West and what happened there, and the importance of figuring out what happened there. One of the and I was just getting to the point that there were two different substances there that could have exploded. One is ammonium nitrate, and the other is anhydrous ammonia. The anhydrous is hard to explode. It's pretty inert in its basic stored form. Apparently, one of the things that can make it explode is pouring water on it. And so one of the questions, and this question is mentioned by a plaintiff's attorney in a story in the Morning News this morning, is whether or not the first responders did that. Did they pour water in some place that could have caused this explosion? And if so, what would that mean? Well, that would mean that you've got this enormous fertilizer plant sitting there in the middle of a town where there's been no attention at all to setback, to a blast zone, to making sure that people are sufficiently distant from it that they can't be destroyed if it goes off. And that's a measurement that's supposed to be ongoing with anything explosive according to industry standards. That if you've got something that can blow down everything within 100 yards, don't have anybody living within 100 yards. If it's a mile, nobody within a mile. Well, no attention has been paid to that in West at all. And what if the emergency plan for this potential bomb that's so huge that it registers as an earthquake when it happens is that you're going to have the guys from the volunteer fire department show up? I don't want to say anything bad or negative or critical about volunteer fire departments, and it sounds like speaking ill of the dead, even to raise the question, because so many of these men lost their lives in this incident. But the fact is, a question that has to be raised is whether or not the people in the volunteer fire department had adequate training to know how to respond to a fire in this place that was an arsenal of intensely explosive material. And did that have, if not, did the lack of training have some tragic role in these events? The other possibility, given the way this happened, is that it wasn't the anhydrous ammonia that went off, that it was the ammonium nitrate, which is powdered and more explosive. If it, according to what I've read, and I'm way out of my weight class on this technically, and if somebody knows more about it, feel free to call. I'm at 972-647-1893. But heat, intense heat, can set off the ammonium nitrate. And it's possible that because there was an initial fire, that's what happened in this case. That raises more questions of how the stuff is stored and how it's protected from heat and how it's protected from fire and what steps were in place to see that this didn't happen. The point that Bill Minutaglio makes in his piece in the New York Times today is that we have a history of these incidents in Texas. Terrible, terrible, tragic explosions like the one in West, and we seem to do nothing about seeing that they won't happen again. Jim Schutze, get off my lawn. We'll see you again after the break.
Ladies and gentlemen, AM Law Group presents a blues legend in a historic venue. This is Greg Smith here to tell you about Bobby Rush at the Sons of Herman Hall on Saturday, April the 27th. That's right, I'll be hosting a legend live and up close in this intimate venue. Get your tickets now and don't miss out and see a complete Bobby Rush show. Joining Bobby Rush will be Little Jimmy and his Feedback Band. Fort Worth party people will have a free Bobby Rush party bus leaving from the Silver Eagle bus station. More information is at knon.org. And if the Grammy-nominated Bobby Rush wasn't enough, we'll have a free dinner from Daddy Jack's Fort Worth and South Lake locations. Get your tickets now at knon.org. Bill's Records, Forever Young Records, and Comp Cleaners in Fort Worth. This is a KNON Blues benefit. Bobby Rush and Little Jimmy and his Feedback Band. April the 27th at the Sons of Herman Hall, 3414 Am Street in Dallas. Presented by AM Law Group and sponsored in part by Top Dollar Tax Service, Silver Eagle Bus Charter, and Daddy Jacks.
If If it's time to get rid of your old gas guzzler, the Knon Vehicle Donation Program can help. There is still a market for those old vehicles, and if you donate it, you're helping to support the quality programming here on KNON. Just call 877-KNON-AUTO or go online to knon.org. We'll take care of everything from pickup to tax paperwork. That's 877-KNON-AUTO. Coming this Saturday, April 20th, it's the 8th annual Texas Barbecue and Blues Review, benefiting the educational fund for the children of Kelly Wayne Hickey. That's this Saturday night from 4 p.m. to midnight at Charlie's. This year's Texas Blues lineup features Leo Hall and the Texas Blues Machine, Hash Brown, Pat Boyack, Gator Watson, Kenny Chavez Combo, Tony Blue, the Popsters, and an open blues jam. Charlie's is located at 1820 West Mockingbird Lane in Dallas. For more information, 972-342-8000.
Take one.
Jim Schutze back with Get Off My Lawn. In the morning news today, there's a story by Randy Lee Loftus, Brandon Formby, and Michael Young, which reveals that in the West Texas fertilizer plant that exploded, they were storing 540,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate. They point out that that's 100 times the weight of the ammonium nitrate that Timothy McVeigh used to knock down the Murrah building 18 years ago Friday. That's 270 tons of ammonium nitrate. Ammonium nitrate is the main ingredient in explosive used in mining, road building. It's dynamite. It's TNT. It's the stuff that's designed to blow things up. And here was this huge stockpile of it in the center of West, next to the, cheek by jowl with the nursing home and the middle school and all these people's homes. Apparently, according to the story, nobody in West knew it was there or knew what it was or knew what the risk was. How can that be? How can that be? And I said at the beginning that when these stories are done, and it was true in Boston too, you get this kind of feel-good, attaboy narrative from the media about how people are pulling together, people are standing tall. I hate to. I mean, okay. I guess there's nothing wrong with that. I guess the reporters feel sorry for the people they see who are victims of these things, and they want to buck them up and encourage them somehow. But that kind of narrative can get in the way of the questions that really need to be asked. And West is a great example. West is a situation that should not have been allowed to exist. I'm going to pause for a second. We've got Annie on line one. Annie, how are you this morning?
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. I was just listening to your show, and I want to make the comment that as a Texan, I am outraged and embarrassed that we are living here with a governor who is so proud of his lack of regulation in this state that a thing like this could happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that lack of regulation ain't free. There's a cost. There's a reason for regulations, right?
That's exactly right. And that's the price. That's the price we pay for that, free enterprise that he's so willingly inviting here to have that lack of regulation to bring those businesses here, and it's like a badge of honor.
Right.
And this is the price that we pay.
But Annie, let me run this by you. It's not just Governor Oops. He's a fairly clever politician. He knows who he's appealing to. I hate to say it, but isn't it true that within West, or in Dallas, where we've had these kinds of explosions and fires, and in Waxahachie, where they recently had a terrible fuel fire in an industrial location, are we not all kind of shy about asking tough questions of industry? I mean, isn't it just sort of true generally in Texas that
yes.
we all let them get away with it?
That's right.
And we see that these are the costs, and the deal. I mean, if you look at the situation in West, you could say, well, what are they going to do? The town grew up around the factory, and you can't move the town, you can't move the factory. But you could move the 270 tons of ammonium nitrate, right?
Right.
You could say, you got to take that stuff and put it far, far away. But
right. Nobody
was asking those questions. Well, so I take it you didn't vote for Governor Oops? Or?
I did not.
Neither did I. And I thank you for your call, Annie. You make a good point that there's a downside to this whole doctrine of deregulation. There's an upside to the pro-business climate in Dallas, in Texas. There absolutely is. We've enjoyed a lot of economic growth and opportunity, and there's nothing for people like jobs. There's nothing like work. We do want to do whatever we can to foster enterprise and business and opportunities for people to work and earn a living. But we have to maintain a certain sanity about it. And if you got 270 tons of an intensely explosive compound sitting right in the middle of a town where nobody has a chance of getting away from it if it goes off, and when that problem is so eminently correctable, you load the stuff up and you take it somewhere else. You don't have to get rid of your plant. They're just processing stuff there anyway. They don't actually manufacture anything at that plant. They're processing and retailing the stuff out the door. They could move the ammonium nitrate somewhere out in the boondocks where it will only blow up cows, poor things, but not human beings. So there are answers to these things, and maybe. We keep hoping every time something like this happens that maybe we'll get to those answers. The problem is that the industry lobby will wait. They're counting the beats. They're going to wait for this to die down, and then the minute somebody shows up in Austin with a bill to impose any kind of real regulation on them, they're going to go to work to kill that bill. And so the question is, who fights them? Who's there to stand up for us? Who's there to stand up for the people of West, or the people of Dallas, for that matter? Who's there to say, no, we've got to have enough regulation to have common sense protection of life and limb in these situations? Well, not the governor, not the Attorney General. Attorney General Greg Abbott brags. He says, in describing his job, he says, I go to work, I sue Barack Obama, and I go home. He thinks that's cool. Governor Oops thinks it's cool. And yet, this incident in West is directly attributable to that kind of mentality and philosophy. This is what you get if you don't have common sense regulation. Our hearts must bleed for those volunteer firemen who rushed to this fire, and they had to know that there was stuff in there that was explosive. They went selflessly anyway, and now they're all gone, and their families are bereft, and their communities are bereft. They're all gone, and that didn't have to happen. There could have been procedures in place, there could have been policies in place that would have prevented that very thing from happening. Maybe it's appropriate that those kinds of questions, maybe it's appropriate that we pause a few days before we really dig into those kinds of questions and deal with the simple loss of life and deal with the heartbreaking effect on the community and the survivors, and wait to start digging into the why until we've gotten through the shock of the event itself. But I also worry that some of this feel-good coverage that you get during these events from the media is just that it masks the anger that we should feel over the events themselves. And I don't like the idea that this is, in the Boston Marathon coverage, some of it, the CNN stuff, you got the feeling that this was like the best thing that had ever happened to Boston. I hate to say it, but there's all this team spirit that seems shabby and fake, and I wish they could control themselves every time they're tempted to launch into that narrative. We started out the show talking about the real problem, the extreme problem with media coverage in these events, and that's just the incredible, sometimes willful inaccuracy of media in covering these stories. And I started out talking about the New York Post, which just time and time again during this coverage misreported the numbers, misreported what mischaracterized the investigation, and then ran these pictures of these two guys they call bagmen on page 1 of the New York Post. Clint actually here suggested a pretty reasonable scenario for how that happened, that they got the word that the authorities were looking for some brothers, and these brothers were kind of dark-looking guys who looked like they could be foreigners. And so somebody searches through all the pictures they've got, which is a zillion pictures that they had from the scene, and they say, hey, here are two guys, they're brothers, they're sort of dark-looking, let's say these are the guys, they might be. And so they put these two utterly innocent young men on the cover and call them bagmen, and then when they find out it's wrong, they refuse to apologize. They shrug it off. Oh, well, nobody's perfect. Reminds me of the line from Judith Miller at the New York Times when somebody asked her how she could have so completely misreported the weapons of mass destruction. She did all this coverage of the run-up to the Iraq War, really, really beating the drum on weapons of mass destruction and selling the war, basically. And I saw an interview with her, and when it was all done, and she said, well, I've covered a lot of wars, so I got one wrong. There's just something, yeah. So you got one wrong. So you helped justify the devastating bombing of a country we didn't need to bomb. I don't know how you live with that one. You don't get a mulligan on wrong wars. And I don't think the New York Post gets a mulligan on putting these two innocent characters on page 1 and calling them the bagmen and calling them the perpetrators when they weren't, and then refusing to apologize. As I said at the top of the show, Gawker kind of fired back at the New York Post with a piece in which they raised the question, how would the New York Post like it if people covered them with these same standards? And that led to this very interesting headline I want to read again before we leave the show, just because I think it's such a marvelous content on media today. And I have to substitute a word that we can't read on the radio. Starts with F, and I'm going to use the word blank. Here was the headline in Gawker: Is the New York Post edited by a bigoted drunk who blanks pigs? It's an interesting question, and one that perhaps needs to be taken up in seminars at journalism schools everywhere as they review these incidents. This is Jim Schutze with Get Off My Lawn, and we'll see you again here next week at 10 a.m. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
KNON 89.3 FM in Dallas and Fort Worth, the voice of the people.
Business owners, tell KNON's listeners about your business. You can put your business or event on KNON. KNON currently has space available to run announcements for you. Tell KNON's listeners about your goods, services, nightclub, concert, or event. Help keep the voice of the people on the air while putting your information on the air. KNON's been named the #1 radio station in Dallas by both the Dallas Observer and D Magazine. Put your business with Dallas's #1 station. Call now for more information at 214-828-9500, extension 227, or extension 233. For more information, go to knon.org and click on the Run Spots on KNON page. It's a great way for your business to support community radio while letting more people know about you.